wake up and welcome to another episode here for the Funky Pod, Mindful Media and Communication. And if you're watching the video feed instead of just listening to my voice, you see I'm back in black, and I'm back in black, not wearing a jersey this time, but I might bring him back. I don't know why I got comments on that, so that's why I'm referencing it. But back in black for the day. And not because we talk about something serious or sad. Well, maybe we are. Let's see about that. But more like, because that's been my podcasting outfit for a while now. Today we talk about, as you see from the title, about the Olympic Games in Paris 2024 kicking off in just about a minute, basically, at the time of recording. So I figured it just makes sense to look into like how media communication is going to be a big part of the Olympic Games, as the Olympic Games will obviously be a big part of all of our lives, to some extent at least. Even if you're not into sports at all, you can't escape the coverage of the Olympic Games. So let's jump into it. Let's look into this, what I think is a fascinating case of media communication, representation, society, and many, many more things probably that we will explore as we move through that journey that we are going on together today. So, also, I'm hesitating because it's probably also going to be about politics. I'm not going to make this a politics podcast, but we probably going to have to talk a little bit about politics. But let's jump right into it, so that I don't have to have any more, setup to this. And if I need a disclaimer, I'm going to edit later. I want to jump into the first theory that I thought of that's really going to impact the way we will perceive the Olympic Games, which is media representation and national identity. Okay, so the Olympics, I think it's quite obvious, they provide a very unique platform for countries to showcase their athletes and, by extension, their national pride and their identity. That brings me to the first actual theory that relates to national identity, which is the media framing theory. All right, so we talked about this theory before, framing theory. The framing theory suggests that the way information is presented or, framed influences the audience's perception. In the context of Olympic Games, different countries' media outlets frame their athletes and their performances to evoke certain emotions, such as national pride and unity, for example. Okay, so for instance, let's compare the coverage of a gold medal that an athlete wins. In the US, for example, the narrative might focus on individual achievement, like look what they overcame in order to win this medal. They grew up like poor, and then the family got separated and whatever happened. And look how through sheer grit and will this athlete overcame all that to now end up with a gold medal. That's the American dream, okay? In other countries, maybe such as Japan, for example, the emphasis could be on discipline, national honor, and so on. Okay, so these frames, they shape how audiences perceive not only the athletes, but also the national identity surrounding the athletes. Okay, so they see the same thing, the athlete winning the gold medal, and then the way media outlets frame it, that then shapes how we understand what we see. Okay, and hand in hand with that, we have another theory that we know. It's called cultivation theory. We will hear about this in a bit as well. The cultivation theory suggests that long-term exposure to media content shapes the viewer's perception of reality. So consistent themes in the Olympic Games and the Olympic coverage, such as resilience, for example, teamwork, patriotism, and so on, will reinforce national identity and value. So if, like, for example, your nation's athlete wins, then you will see this in the news or on TV, on the internet, over and over and over again, so that you eventually might end up feeling like a bit more proud of your nation simply because of what they achieved. Okay, so that's like how cultivation theory could lead to an increased feeling of unity, maybe national pride, but definitely like more of a unity kind of thing, right? And In addition to this, there's another theory that we already talked about before as well, which is called the social identity theory. So the social identity theory, of course, as you can see, tells us certain things about athletes, but also about society, okay? And while it's related to the media and framing theory, of course, and to the cultivation theory, as I mentioned before, there's something that makes it also a little bit more unique. But we will have like a long discussion on social identity theory in just a bit. But the social identity theory, again, also explains how this whole athlete team thing will influence the way we perceive social identities in terms of athlete, but also in terms of who we are. More on this in a second. Before I go into more detail about the social identity theory, because I think it's very, very interesting, I will throw one more at you in this regard, because I think that's one that's not been discussed a lot, but I find it very interesting. And this very interesting one is called narrative paradigm theory. And the narrative paradigm theory suggests that the humans are natural storytellers. You hear me probably talk about this a lot if you listen to the podcast, right? And we make sense of the world through stories, through narratives. So the stories that are being told about athletes and their journeys to the Olympics, for example, are very powerful narratives that resonate with audiences. And the stories that we hear about the athletes contribute to like this, either maybe a shared national identity, if that's like the story behind it, but mostly probably more like a collective memory, and again, more of a feeling of unity, like, hey, that's so inspirational what that person overcame. Wow, if that person can do it, we can do that, right? So it's like this collective memory, which is pretty cool to actually witness. Okay. That was the first segment I prepared for today. I have 5 or 6 segments I want to take you through. The second one is going to be the most controversial one, so let's get out of the way. It's about gender representation in sports media. And I know it shouldn't be a topic, but unfortunately over the past few years it has become a pretty big topic, right? And the thing here is also that there are a few theories in play that might help understand why gender could still be a thing. And please let me explain first before you start to cancel me, okay? So one theory is called gender schema theory, which looks into how media plays a crucial role in like perpetuating gender norms, okay? For example, during the Olympics, you often see like differences in how male and female athletes are being covered. Yeah, male athletes might be portrayed as powerful and dominant, while female athletes might be highlighted for appearance, emotions, and whatnot. And now you might say, hey, wait a second. You're so old school, like an old head. That's not how it is anymore. Wait, is it though? Because maybe it's just how or what media you're exposed to. If you're in the West, and as you know, I know you can't tell from my accent, but as you know, from Germany, and I think Germany is a very woke country. So in this case, it's a good thing. I don't mean to diminish anything. So I think more vocal countries in this regard, of course, the coverage is like different. They try to hopefully have a more equal coverage when it comes in to the term of like how to portray an athlete. As someone who lives in Asia, though, I can tell you that Asian sports media, for example, still uses those stereotypes and talk about like how the athlete looked, how the athlete behaved, whether or not the athlete was emotional or not emotional, and things like that. Okay, so if we are exposed to more of a Western media, maybe that's not the case anymore, but then we have to be aware that there's also other media still out there, and the other way around, vice versa, right? So if we are in, for example, the Asian media space right now, and we see like, hey, why do we cover so much of how they behave and how they look? Maybe we can look at like other media outlets to see, oh, that doesn't need to be the case. We could focus more on like actual achievements. All right. So I think that's like, we need to be more open-minded in either space that we are in to see that there are like different ways it's been done, to understand that this unfortunately is still a thing. And that's why I try to highlight that a little bit. Okay. This goes hand in hand again. I mean, all the theories go hand in hand, of course, with the theory we talked about many a times here, which is the agenda setting theory. The agenda setting theory, as we know by now, suggests that the media doesn't tell us what to think, but what to think about. So the amount of coverage given to male versus female athletes, for example, could influence their visibility and their importance. Right? Okay, that also goes for sports, for example. Of course, I'm a big volleyball fan, as you might know, so volleyball doesn't get as much coverage as football, for example, soccer for the Americans, or track and field and so on. All right, so that's also a gender setting. In this case, the example I'm making right now is like still the gender segment of the podcast. So this means like, do female athletes get as much exposure as male athletes, for example? Okay. And if we analyze the coverage of male, female, and so on, we can see like how media attention, or maybe even lack thereof, affects the perception of, for example, female athletes and their sports. Yeah, if you just, most famous example probably, NBA versus WNBA. Okay. I have one more that helps, or that explains a little bit of like what's going on there, which is called symbolic annihilation, and that term is coined a while back by George Gerbner, and I noted it down because it's the first time I mentioned that. And that simply refers to the underrepresentation, or maybe even misrepresentation, of certain groups in the media. So, for example, when female athletes receive less coverage or are depicted in like those stereotypical ways that I mentioned before, it contributes to the symbolic annihilation of that group, for example, which then minimizes their achievement and the impact that their achievements have. And now don't take this out of context, but it's just women's basketball, for example. Okay, so that would be like that diminishing or the symbolic annihilation, because it minimizes their achievement and the impact that it should have, actually, because it's a great achievement. Okay, so that's something you should also be aware of when consuming media coverage in this regard when it comes to the Olympics. But away from all the gender talk, hopefully that's not going to be that important, fingers crossed. What's definitely going to be important is, however, the topic of cultural diplomacy and soft power. And I know soft power, big buzzword, especially here in Southeast Asia right now, is everything is soft power, which then actually leads to no one really knowing what soft power actually means. So let me explain. Okay, so soft power describes a country's ability to influence others through cultural or ideological means rather than coercion or force. So the Olympics are like a perfect example of soft power in action. Okay, countries use the Olympics to showcase their culture, values, technological advancements, and so on. So, for example, the opening ceremony, they are often like those grand displays of national culture, which are meant to impress and inspire. So France, in Paris, it's in German, it's hard to say, they're gonna try to inspire and wow the world. And I mean, they do have some nice old buildings there. Oh, it's so hard to say something nice about France. But also not only the host, right? Also like visiting countries try to inspire and impress by the way they dress, the way they behave, the way they talk, and so on, of course, right? So that's soft power for you, okay? Like with the food, for example, could be soft power as well in this extent that we're talking about, okay? Public diplomacy then simply means that direct communication is going to happen with like foreign publics to establish like a dialogue designed to, well, inform, but if you're honest, mostly also to influence. And the Olympics, of course, like a major public diplomacy event. How so? Well, because through media and cultural exhibitions, countries engage in public diplomacy, and they aim to improve their global image and like foster this international goodwill kind of thing. So France, even though I promise you we will see demonstrations, water cannons and stuff like this at some point during the Olympics, but France is going to try to foster this international goodwill by being the perfect host. I mean, look how pretty, how beautiful, how well organized everything is. Look at us, we're awesome. Okay, so that's like public diplomacy at play there. And another theory I want to throw in there is a theory called cultural capital theory. Actually from a French researcher. It is suggested non-financial social assets such as education, intellect, style of speech, dress, physical appearance, and so on contribute to social mobility. So looking at the Olympics, right? The cultural capital that's displayed by nations during the Olympics through ceremonies, athlete conduct, national narratives, and so on, enhances the international standing and international influence of those countries. Again, most likely the host country will benefit most or suffer most, hopefully benefit most from that, but also visiting countries, sending athletes, sending delegations, sending diplomats, and so on, will try to utilize this to their advantage. Okay? So that's how the cultural diplomacy and soft power are going to be like a main focus point when it comes to big sports events such as the Olympic Games. The Olympic Games, of course, being one of the biggest sporting events possible, and that's why it's so important to understand that. Now the segment I prepared is just to give you a breather because it's about social media and athlete branding, and we talked a lot about it. So I'm going to make this quicker than usual. I will talk even quicker than usual. We know that social media has revolutionized how athletes build their personal brands, how they engage with fans, and so on. So let's dive into like how they actually do it, just to be aware of it again, right? So one theory that helps us understand that is called self-presentation theory. Self-presentation theory involves the process by which individuals, athletes, control the impression others form of them. So they use social media to craft their own public persona. For example, who do I take? Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt used Instagram, X, and so on to share behind-the-scene moments, training routines, nutrition, personal insights. Like, hey, I'm in the athlete village right now. Look how cool it is. In order to build like relatable and engaging content. That's pretty easy to understand, right? So, self-presentation theory: how you present yourself in the media. Thanks to social media, you can do this 24/7, of course. Another friend of ours is the use and gratification theory. Use and gratification, as you know, explores how individuals actively seek the type of media to satisfy specific needs or desires. Those needs or desires could be entertainment, information, personal connection, and so on. That's why you follow athletes, right? And if the athletes give you that entertainment, information, personal connection, then you will engage more with them, which makes them a bigger brand. They get more endorsements, they make more money, they're happier for it, probably. So, use and gratification theory. Still talking that fast because we talked about all those things before, okay? I'm going to slow down a little bit just now. I'm going to add one more theory to the whole social media segment, if you will. And the theory I'm adding right now is called, but we had it before too, but maybe not in that much detail, parasocial interaction theory. Parasocial interaction theory. The parasocial interaction theory describes the one-sided relationship that audiences develop with media personalities / athletes. And so through social media, fans feel this personal connection with athletes because you're exposed to them a lot, even more during the Olympic Games. However, there might not be a real interaction. There's a huge lack of interaction because, of course, they have to focus. They cannot respond to anyone or everyone. That's what we call a parasocial relationship. Okay, so the fan loyalty increases because we see so much of the athlete and like backstage stuff and behind the scenes. And like, oh my God, I know so much about the athlete. But the athlete doesn't know you at all. That's a parasocial relationship, and those increase because of the increased exposure of the athletes with us, towards us during the Olympic Games. Okay, so don't become a crazy stalker. The security is very good at the Olympic Games usually, even though it's in France, but I guess they will have good security. Did you see those bets, by the way, of the Olympic Games? I saw the Team USA posting about we made it to the Olympic Village and theirs does not look comfortable. Okay, but that's not my place to talk about now or to criticize. 2 more segments I prepared for you for the first Olympic Games episode. There will be probably 1 or 2 more. This one is about media technologies and like maybe some broadcasting innovations, but mostly media technologies. As you know, I'm a big tech nerd, right? So technological advancements obviously transform how we experience the whole Olympics. You don't just sit down anymore in front of the TV and that's all you get, right? There's way more to it. So then one of the theories that really applies here is called the diffusion of innovation theory. So diffusion of innovation theory explains how, why, and at what rate new ideas, new technologies spread through cultures. So how fast are they being adopted? So if it comes to Olympic Games, you will see that technologies such as VR, AR, 5G obviously, AI of course as well, enhance the whole viewing consumption experience, making it like way more immersive, way more interactive. Okay, so those technologies, they are rapidly being adopted by broadcasters, by media channels to engage audience even more. Because of course you don't just want them to only look at the screen, because if they only look at the screen, at the TV screen, they can do many other things as well with their phones, or they don't want to sit down, they want to be somewhere. So you use different channels to actually reach them to make it more immersive. And that leads to the second theory here in this segment to come into play, which is called the convergence theory, media convergence. Okay, media convergence. Convergence means coming together, not diverging, going apart, converging, bringing together. So we're merging different media channels in this case. Okay, so in this case of the Olympic Games, outlets that report about the Olympic Games, they will merge different channels, different forms of media to have the most immersive, the most buzzword incoming 360 coverage of the Olympic Games. So not just TV, but also then social media, applications, a YouTube channel, AI to give you the stats as fast as possible, some interaction possibilities, voting and stuff like this. Okay, so using different forms of media to have the most immersive, the most 360, the most engaging experience as possible to keep the audience engaged. And with this, there's one more model that I mentioned before once on the podcast, so let's see who remembers that. It's called TAM, Technology Acceptance Model. The TAM explains how users come to accept and use a technology based on perceived ease of use and perceived usefulness. So the audience will only use the technology that the broadcaster is using if the audience thinks A, it's easy to use, and B, it's useful. It gives me, it enhances my viewing pleasure, if you will. So in order to do this, you gotta understand how audiences perceive new technologies. So you need to understand who's your audience. And it's one thing I tell my students all the time: know your audience. You have to understand who's your audience. If you're like an old school TV channel, channel 1, channel 2, whatever, in whatever country you are, and your audience might be a bit older, do you really want to force them into like, hey, let's do this AR thing, take out your phones and scan? You're going to do this? But if your audience is younger and they're on TikTok anyways, you're like, hey, let's do it. Let's just take out your phone, scan this thing, and then you can interact with us. That might work. So know your audience, okay? Technology acceptance model means know your audience. Know, will they use that new thing that you're planning to do, or won't they? Okay, very important, because you can have the best idea ever and you think, that's going to be so cool, so engaging, and then no one's using it because it's too difficult for your audience. Okay, know your audience. Remember the TAM. Okay, TAM is coming for you. All right. And my last segment that I prepared for us here, I want to quickly talk about the sad-ish but necessary part of commercialization and sponsorships. Because of course the Olympics are like this massive commercial event driven by sponsorships, advertisement, and so on, right? So we gotta talk about theory number 1, political economy of media. This theory means or tries to showcase how economic pressures and interests shape media content. Okay, so economy over everything, unfortunately. So corporate sponsorships will heavily influence Olympic coverage. They will often prioritize commercial interests over pure sports reporting. That's why will most likely only see events, athletes that draw clicks, views, and so on. You will see more about LeBron than you will see about a really good shot put person, for example. Okay, why? Again, political economy of media. More sponsors will be behind showing LeBron on the screen, because if LeBron's on the screen, then people will see your ad. So put more of LeBron on the screen, then more people see my ad. Okay, unfortunately, that's the case. So it's political economy of media. So when you ask why don't they show volleyball, which I want to see, but show like football for the 10,000th time, that's why. Because the sponsors behind it, they say, no, we want our brand associated with football rather than with a sport that no one's watching. Okay. Another theory that goes hand in hand with that one again, nothing new. Branding theory. Branding simply means which strategies can I use to create and maintain my brand image, right? So, for example, during the Olympics, Coca-Cola and Nike will be everywhere. This opening ceremony is presented to you by Coke. Have it your way. No, it's not Coke. Or Nike's going to be like, hey, look, this Team USA beating the East, whatever, by 1 point, powered by Nike or whatever. You know what I'm saying, right? So brands try to associate with athletic excellence, with grand openings, with great shows, so that we think, oh, they are so awesome. Does it work? You tell me. Last theory on this, the one that makes me sad, it's called commodification theory. So commodification theory is very much rooted in like the Marxist school. Actually now don't try to argue with me on like Marxism and stuff in terms of media consumption. Okay, stay cool. The theory examines like how goods and services are turned into commodities for market exchange. Okay, so again, goods and services turned into commodities for market exchange. Now, what does that mean for the Olympic Games? In the Olympic Games, like athletes and Olympic symbols, maybe even, are very much commodified, for profit, obviously. So which then transforms them, athletes, teams, Olympic symbols, a hoodie with the Olympic logo on it, for example, so they're transformed into something marketable products, through then, of course, also more sponsorships and more endorsements. You would get like those customized Coke cans with like the Olympic logo on it and then with your favorite athletes on it, for example. Right? So that's all the commodification of that sporting event in this case, which again, a purist, a lover of pure sports might be sad about it. I hate commodification in this regard. However, as we now understand, it's of course also necessary to maintain all the coverage and so on. But then it will also lead to agenda setting because of course those sponsors will tell us what to think about. Isn't it frustrating or interesting? You tell me. I'm going to leave it at that because I've been on this now for almost 30 minutes. I think that's enough for our first Olympic episode because just like your favorite broadcasting station, I will also talk more about it depending on like what's happening during the Olympics. So should there anything be happening, we will obviously have a podcast about it. We'll analyze it from a media and communication theories point of view. Until then, I would love to know what you're looking forward to the most or the least. Will you ignore the Olympics? Will you be all in about the Olympics? Let me know what's your favorite, what you can't wait to see. Leave a review on this podcast. That would be fantastic. Follow on all the platforms that you listen, that you watch. Social media at FunkedPod. If you have anything to say, shout out there. Until then, stay safe, take care. I hope your favorite athlete wins and brings you joy, unless he, she, they are up against my favorite athletes, of course. We will talk about this soon. Until then, take care. Sawadee Krap.